it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. Now, my dear friends, tonight's introductory blurb will be a little bit different from what I normally do for you, and there's a very good reason for that. But let me just have a little quick teaser for you to get you interested in tonight's story. In a world consumed by an eldritch darkness, following the return of the Restless God, survivors struggle to escape a landscape infested by nightmarish creatures known as Rippers. Tonight's story follows a young man named Jack, who uses a magical device to navigate the void and lead a small group of refugees toward a mountain sanctuary called Mount Despair. Now, moving away from what I normally do, I'm going to heap praise on my dear collaborator this evening, VDiff22, and that will become more clear at the little monologue I do at the end of the story. So if you don't normally listen to those, please give it a listen tonight. It's quite special, and I have a little request for all of you. So tonight's story follows some important themes that we can all relate to. The idea of finding hope in distant places, of necessary sacrifices along the way, and human resilience in the face of overwhelming despair. All things I think we can relate to. Anyway, I'm waffling on right at the start this evening. Enough of this. Let's get on with the story.
The Restless God lies trapped, but not idle in its sealed-off realm. It writhes and yearns for the day it may again take pleasure in the pain of mortals, to once again play in the blood and bask in the terror only finite creatures can produce. Many worlds it's fed upon, but never satiated. But the world that fought back against its attacks long ago are the ones it wants all the more. It has become an obsession. So it waits, and it feels, searching for weaknesses between the borders of our world and itself. Hungry and anxious, it salivates all the thought of reaching into our world again. It will be its greatest decadence and pleasure, and our darkest days. Despite this, we must pray to her divine. We must beg for mercy and the return of her light. Grand Mage Telamon IV, on the prophecy of the Dark God's return. Second Age.
Pitch blackness, pure darkness, a thick void of nothing completely swallowing me up like a fish in the depths of an ocean. I was crouched low in a ready position, using my right hand to balance my holding onto the wagon's wheel beside me. My legs burned from forcing myself to remain completely still. Pain had become a constant in my life now, but I was grateful for the adrenaline burst that would always dampen the ever-present burden of hunger and fatigue. At least it helped for a little, but the pain found its way back to me faster and faster each time. It was hot and humid, almost like the swamps of the eastern bog, a good 3 weeks' journey from here. The cold wind stopped when the darkness befell our remote town, and the breeze no longer ran its cold tendrils across the barren streets. I grabbed the thin string tied around my neck and pulled out a heavy monocle hanging from it. I held the cold metal up to my eye to look through the green-tinted glass. The magically infused monocle always remained cool to the touch, with a static shock feeling emanating from it. I held it to my eye to see the world around me clearly, yet tinted in bright shades of green. My eyes roamed across the quiet, motionless street. Debris and bloated corpses littered the street. With no wind and the unnaturally heavy darkness, this somehow had a dampening effect on the stench coming from decaying bodies. They could only be smelled once you were almost on top of them, or a meter away. My dead kinsmen helped, even in death, making good landmarks to navigate through the darkness. There were monsters that accompanied the dark fog, twisted figures that were the void itself. Maybe they were the cruel thoughts of the Restless God made manifest. Humans long ago, in the First Age, had named them Rippers. We all hoped they were just a myth, not actual walking nightmares. Oh, the Rippers swarmed the town in the blinding dark. They seemed to only kill for killing's sake. They never ate the people they killed, almost like it was just for fun instead of survival. Well, it made sense in some twisted way. The Restless God must have returned to our realm and brought these hateful things with it. Our prophets had long told of the Restless One's return by its sending nightmares through the veil of reality to infest in the minds of our leaders. Centuries of slowly chipping away at the barriers separating us, chipping away at our sanity. The Restless One birthed itself into our reality like an already dead, stillborn abomination. Like a newborn giant, deformed with extra limbs and already rotting from death. But it was alive as this strange creature could be. Now it was free, and this did not bring the thing elation, just more anger and restlessness. How do I know all of these things? Well, the nightmare visions sent to all mortals across the realm since the Restless One's return. Actually, there were nightmares for most of the town leading up to the event. I guess it was our omens for being so close to the epicenter of its invasion. One omen would have been terrible enough, but something this perverse stacked on the misfortune. Dark signs of its arrival showed themselves all over the kingdom of Muldoon. The signs stretched further across to the neighboring kingdoms. The wretched god's birth pains were so terrible I wager they were felt thousands of leagues away on the wild continent. But the other kingdoms didn't have the vast magical communication network like us Mondunians, so reports of bad omens tempered off dramatically outside of our borders. The misfortune of my town was, like I said, we were the closest to the epicenter of the entity's push into our reality, closest to the cradle of the spoiled god. An entire mountain range protected us from the shockwave of magical energy, but all livestock seized up and died. All birds fell from out of the air. All rodents died in their holes, and our very young died in their cribs. It was a terrible event to have the town's children instantly killed, but now I see it as a mercy for the little ones. The innocent children got to go to our divine in their sleep, peacefully, or at least quickly. Now they didn't have to die in the suffocating dark, or by the diseased claws of the rippers. The town's guard fell quickly. A group of 16 men on loan from the capital to keep peace and protect the trade routes. Our peacekeepers were more used to using words to settle disputes among merchants, or occasionally throw a drunk into a cell overnight. But they were ill-equipped to handle the inky blackness that engulfed the town, rolling down from the mountain like a fluid landslide. The confusion of the townspeople quickly turned to pandemonium as the screams began. That's when we realized we were not alone in the dark. Things moved quickly in the blackness, and the rippers began to slaughter everyone in this pitch dark. The first few days are a blur to me even now, but that's how I remember the beginning of the horror, the beginning of the end. I remember the dark engulfing the town, the adrenaline of fear. My last sight was of silent death spilling down from the mountains like a boiling pot overflowing with a viscous poison. When the black fog first swept over me, my first few breaths of the miasma burned my eyes and lungs. The taste of metal on my tongue, the smell of sulfur and something sweet and rancid, decay and corruption. Now I had to shake the fog out of my head and return to the terrible present. I had to embrace the hopeless situation without falling to despair. My magical sight, gazing through the monocle, finally spotted the rest of my group. Gilsophie, Taggart, and Philippe. Tag and Fell carrying the heavy burlap sacks of animal feed, while Jill led the three of them through the darkness with her own magical monocle. We spotted each other from across the corpse-littered roadway. The general goods store had caught on fire early in the supernatural invasion. Somehow the strange darkness had put out the fire, snuffing it out like a heavy blanket thrown over a weak flame. That's why we were back, looting the store, trying to keep from starving to death before the rippers could kill us first. Jill gave me a series of quick hand signals I'd recently taught her. They'd scavenged 3 bags of feed. Phil was carrying 2 big bags and Taggart one of them, but they were heavy and we were all weak. Jill wasn't carrying anything. She was too busy leading the 2 of them by pulling on the corded string she'd tied around both their waists. Before I waved the 3 of them to hurry over, I turned to Cavill, my partner in crime on this side of the road beside me. He blinked wide in the darkness, one gloved hand twisting the ends of his greying moustache, while the other held a death grip on the pommel of his sheathed short sword. I had to remember I could see him clearly through my monocle, but he only saw and felt the oppressive darkness. He was just waiting for a claw or fang to strike him out of the darkness, and because of this I lightly placed my hand on his shoulder. The light touch didn't stop Cavill from almost jumping out of his boots. He quickly calmed when he realized it was me. The old warrior steadied himself once more. I placed my hand on the flat of his chest so he could feel my finger placement through his light shirt. I signed the question to him through a series of light thumps separating the words. Another bag, 40 pounds. Can you carry? I finished my signing by holding the hand placement designating a question mark firmly against his chest. I saw his eyes widen and he grimaced in doubt. His old frame shook a little as he prepared his answer. Of course, he answered back that he could carry the load, but I knew the real answer. It's amazing how much we communicate through non-verbal cues, and how much more when we think we're concealed in darkness. He was barely standing on 2 feet, starving and aching. Well, he was pushing his late 50s, and his joints and muscles carried the pain of being a veteran soldier for over 30 years. He would collapse under the weight of his light armor and newly added bag of feed. No way he could keep quiet or climb back up into the attic we were all hiding in. Cavill's years of being a proud soldier almost assured me that he would take on the task regardless of his disposition, so I signed back to Jill. Drop 3rd bag. Later. I lied and informed Cavill that I was incorrect in my assessment. There wasn't an extra bag of feed, and we would be returning to the relative safety of the windmill. Jill quietly led Phil, with Taggart close behind, across the road, her own magic monocle making it possible to maneuver around the maze of debris and bodies. They all moved slow enough for Jill to communicate with sharp tugs on the string fastened around both of them. Stealth was key. When I first saw it, I didn't know how to react. I knew what the Rippers looked like through my monocle, and I knew the placement of all the dead townfolk. As I watched my 3 companions snake around the bloated body of Mr. Dirge, the blacksmith, I saw the faintest quiver of motion within the corpse. Well, normally that would mean some sort of vermin or carrion feeder had nestled within the body. But in this nightmare world we lived in, the Rippers killed everything that wasn't already slaughtered when the Restless One re-emerged into our reality, sending out its shockwave of death. To my horror, I realized something else. Upon closer inspection of Mr. Dirge's body, I noticed it had somehow moved a couple of feet to the left since last time I'd seen him. I could even see the wet smear marks in the dirt from where it dragged itself over. My magic monocle could also detect other magic. It wasn't very good at it, but still could. My vision was bathed in illuminating green, but magic showed up white. That's what I saw rising out of Mr. Dirge's body. 4 bright, spider-like legs protruded out of the back of the corpse and hooked into the ground, lifting the stiff dead body into the air slowly, quietly. Jill and the others were completely unaware of the horror looming up behind them. The jaw of Mr. Dirge fell off with a soggy plop into the dirt. What looked like a large inverted scorpion's tail writhed out of the body's mouth. The scorpion tail hung down around the body's bloated chest, the tail curling up to point a large stinger at the group. I could see that Jill had heard the plop of the jaw falling off the corpse behind her. She raised her eyebrows, sniffed the air, and froze in an alert state, her 2 companions bumping into her. I'd temporarily frozen too. I'd never seen a monster like this before, its spider legs lifting the body up to let its human feet brush its toes lightly on the ground. The whole body was ridged from rigor mortis. The body's hands curled to its chest, making fists, stiff legs swaying like the awkward pendulum of a clock. Still, bodily juices and blood oozed profusely from his mouth and ripped open guts. A surreal thought came into my mind. Maybe it was my mind trying to make sense of nonsense. Mr. Dirge's stiff body reminding me of a toy soldier from my childhood. They were always stiff-jointed when brand new, not dead. I finally snapped out of my daze when glowing white spiky tendrils pushed the body's guts out with yet another wet impact noise. The many spiked appendages snaked out slowly towards the back of the unaware taggart. "Jill!" My voice boomed out, breaking the silence like a cannon burst. Everyone jumped in surprise. "Run! Run!" With my offhand, I quickly dug into my pocket and produced a flare, a phosphorus-filled stick. I quickly pulled the cap off with my teeth, igniting the flame dangerously close to my face. I didn't care, and barely felt the heat. Holding out the flare to signal to Jill and the others, producing a blinding light in the dark. The blackness was unnatural and dampened the burning flame into a muted orange glow. Regardless, the flare was still bright enough to signal the unsuspecting trio crossing the street. Through the monocle, I saw all three of them lock eyes on the light and begin to hurry towards me. It was against human instinct to run unaware in darkness. This made them not fast enough, because the dirge thing shot out a torso tendril to stab Taggart in the upper back. Taggart let out a cry of pain, but kept coming. His cry of pain was causing all three to break out into a full run, the need to live finally overriding the need to see. I dropped the flare as Jill led the other two up to me. They almost ran her poor soul over as she braced to stop them. The dirge monster seemed to be slow. Her divine was still blessing us. I grabbed Cavill's shoulder and Jill grabbed the tail of my shirt, and we all took off together back to the windmill. We tried to go as fast as we could, the couple blocks back to our hideout, but it was hard going. Cavill lagged beside me, with Tag and Fell huffing as they carried the 40-pound feed bags. I looked back at Dirge to see it had fallen on its stomach and was skittering after us like a centipede. Oh, it was considerably faster now. I lowered the monocle to put both hands on Cavill's shoulders and push him in front of me. Even if I pushed him, we still wouldn't be fast enough, though. My mind raced, like it had so many times since the birth of the Restless One. My mind swirled with anxious thoughts of decisions and counter-decisions. My sleep-deprived and starving brain hallucinated the faces of my people alongside the terrible silver teeth of the rippers lunging towards me out of the colorless backdrop. But like always, I made a desperate choice. Drop the feedbacks. It's gaining on us. I expected to hear the dum, dum of the bags hitting the dirt. But I got what I least expected instead. "No, Jack. Don't drop the feed. I'll buy you time," Cavill said as he shrugged free of my grasp on his shoulders and started in the opposite direction towards Dirge. "I'm so tired of running away. And I miss my daughter and grandkids," the old warrior declared, his voice cracking at the end of his statement. He held out an outstretched hand and fingers. When the tips of them made contact with Jill's dirty clothes, he easily sidestepped around Jill and the other two with grace as they hurried past him in the dark. These skills were long honed from blindfold training to heighten a soldier's situational awareness level. Jill was the only other to see what was happening. She reached out for him as the other two pushed her forward. She stifled a cry and pushed ahead. I was glad Jill wouldn't see this, but I felt I had to watch. I had to witness his sacrifice in the depths of this hell. I saw Dirge's corpse crawl its way up to Cavill, one of its longer talons hooking into his upper knee. Cavill screamed and sliced horizontally instantly. The sword cut through the air harmlessly over the monster. Cavill took this information and countered quickly as more sharp tendrils stabbed into his lower body. He rose the blade high over his head and let out a final death blow, plunging the sword downwards to impale the monster, staking it to the ground. The monster pulled the old soldier down and tore into him. Cavill's screams echoed out as I turned to run. Worse is when his screams finally choked out and fell silent. The group of us made it, unaccosted, for the rest of our journey. We hurried in silence, just like we were in mourning. We made it to the edge of town where the river and the watermill stood. We climbed up the stacked boxes on the side of the building to slide open a wooden panel into the attic. The inside of the attic had the low glow of multiple lanterns and the stuffy smell of multiple unwashed people living in tight quarters together for a long time. We piled in quickly to close up the entrance behind us. There were 7 of us now. It was me, Jill, Charlene, Taggart, and Mama Denise with her 2 grandkids. All 4 sets scanned us as we entered. No one had to ask what happened to Cavill. They all knew. I think even the kids knew. By the best we could reckon, it had been a month since death swept over our town. The Rippers patrolled the streets and buildings constantly, searching for survivors to kill in the beginning. They also destroyed any cache of food or weapons they came across. There was a deeper intelligence behind these Rippers. They were vicious and animalistic when encountered, but they would carry out complicated tasks relentlessly, like soldiers receiving orders. It had to be the malicious influence of the Restless One speaking to all of them, like they were the claws at the end of his corrupting grasp. It was Jill that had the idea for the feed bags at the general store. Yes, they were for cows and horses, but they'd been magically enhanced and would give the human body what it needed also. It would give us enough strength to try and escape this divine, forsaken town, and hopefully leave the darkness to flee to the safety of the capital. I knew the thought of making it all the way to the capital was ridiculous. The longer we headed east, the more likely we would run into the army of Rippers that left the town at least 2 days ago. God, it had been hundreds of them. Me and Jill were out scouting the general store for the feed bags we'd just now retrieved. The going was slow, because the army was everywhere. We knew how to maneuver from rooftop to closely packed rooftop, and they grew closer together the closer together we got to the center of town. From where we started, the watermill on the outskirts of town, it seemed like the town was suspiciously empty of the monsters. But we soon realized that was the opposite. We didn't see any Rippers on the outskirts because they were all gathering together in the town square. The bright figures of humanoid-shaped demons clustered together in a giant group. The magical vision of the monocle causing them to glow from whatever evil sorcery created them. So many of them huddling together, creating a glowing sea, flooding the courtyard. Rippers were rumored to have always existed, even before the Restless One returned. They were rare and only inhabited places of great tragedy and a history of dark magic. Now there was an army of them, amassing to march east towards the capital. Some said the Rippers were phantoms created by the Restless One. They were his only way to reach through dimensions and torment the living. More scholarly old-timers theorized the Rippers came from the vengeful spirits of the long-extinct elves, hunted to extinction by man a millennium ago. Ancient texts mention the long-extinct legacy elves that had a bad habit of dabbling in dark magic, causing the Restless One to specifically target them, repeatedly using the elves' innate affinity with magic to breach into our reality to cause havoc. Many believe man's genocide against the elves was not entirely warranted. It had helped seal the Restless One away. But not all the elves worshipped the Restless One. Many of them worshipped her divine, like we humans do. But relations between elves and humans had always been strained, and this was the excuse humans needed to eliminate their rival for dominance over the lands once and for all. Why must we be punished? I remembered Tehema asking when all this first happened, back when she was alive. It's not our fault. It's the fault of our long-dead ancestors. The kingdom that committed the atrocity doesn't even exist anymore, Tehema said in a fit of nervous mania. We had to hush her for getting too loud. But the truth is, we had no answer. There was no clear reason why we were all being subjected to such anguish. Like I said, Tahima didn't make it anyways. On a supply run, she grabbed a doll from her old home to bring to Mama Denise and her 2 girls, but had dropped it in the street when Jill spotted a group of rippers scaling the rooftops a block away. We all scrambled to hide, hoping the Ripper patrol would move along, but they spotted the dolly laying in the dirt. Some sort of supernatural intelligence recognized this wasn't here on their last patrol. They knew humans were moving around. The 5 of the Rippers in the patrol circled the doll, all letting out high-pitched squeals like an alarm calling to others. Jill and I hid in a nasty bale of hay next to a gutted horse laying beside it, hopefully masking our scent. Terror rose as we watched more and more Rippers coming out of the shadows. They slid down buildings, out of doorways, from under debris, and they were all screaming, almost deafening us. There were 3 magical monocles during this time. All of us had one. We could all see the count of Rippers going into the hundreds. They would find us. By flooding every corner of the street, they would come across us eventually. That's when Tahima made her decision. I didn't see exactly where she hid, but she wasn't hiding anymore. She broke cover and ran directly into the streets, into the crowd of monsters. She tossed her monocle behind her towards our direction, maybe for us to recover later. Well, of course, they glowed brightly through the monocle, but to the naked eye, they were inky black. Blacker than their surroundings, making it almost impossible to see them. When the Rippers got close to their chosen victim, they allowed their prey to see their shiny silver teeth. Sharp, protruding teeth stand out bright and glistening, almost like silver against the backdrop of darkness, as they moved in to kill the hapless human. This is all Tahima saw as she dropped to her knees and searched blindly for the dropped dolly. She screamed and cried as the teeth sank into her, tearing off little bits of her flesh. The Rippers began to whoop and laugh like hyenas as they snatched piece by piece of her away. From the little I knew, the Rippers didn't need to eat. They just bit her for the joyful cruelness of it. The blood-soaked, mostly skinless hands of poor Tahima found the dolly that had started all of this horror. She hugged it close to her skinless chest and let out a gurgling scream before tipping over, most likely dead from shock. That very second, that truly horrid moment, I decided I wasn't going to die in this town. I wasn't going to wait it out like all the old-timers advised. They were all dead now anyways. They didn't wait it out. The king's armies hadn't made it in time. No fireballs from battle mages to shatter the darkness. No royal purple knights led by the heroic Prince Julian. No salvation from her divine. If we waited, we would all die in the dark. And no doubt the king was coming with his armies. But how many days or years would it take for him to reach our settlement? No, I would not die here. I promised myself this years ago. I would survive like I'd also promised. I would save Jill the way she saved me. Then the army of Rippers moved out east towards the capital. But there were still wicked things left behind to kill us. But, well, this was our best chance. As I sat in the darkness of the attic, my mind was free to visualize in wonderful, colorful detail my last memories before the Restless One tainted our town with its sightless void. I remembered walking through the town, going towards the training academy. I was going to climb the mountain behind it. I was going to climb it again and again until I graduated and became one of the Royal Warden's squires. The academy started soon. I never made it to the top without resting and dropping my pack. And this is why I was one of the first to see our oncoming doom. The inky blackness spilled out from around the mountain to flood towards the town. I knew I had to run and give warning to the town's guard. I wasn't a warden squire yet, but I still had a duty to protect the people. Tears heated up my cheeks as I sat in the dark, grateful Jill and the others couldn't see me crying, as as I remembered the death that followed. One of my last memories gave me the tiniest blink of hope. I remembered the peak of the mountain, stabbing through the blackness. The mountain was tall enough to escape the flood of hell filling the valleys and town around it. There was a ceremonial watchtower at the top of the mountain, filled with supplies. It's where the academy cadets earned their badges and completed their training. The mountain was the last test to becoming a warden squire. A grueling uphill climb with a nickname given to the mountain by past cadets that like to boast over their hard-earned accomplishments. The mountain was affectionately called Mount Despair, and it would soon be our salvation. Part 2. The hot, cramped attic brought stressful dreams. They were more vivid of late. I wondered if there was some sort of magic involved, or maybe it was just the extreme stress of the situation finally getting to me. We were all grateful for the noise camouflage the constant cranking and splashing of the watermill caused, because it drowned out most of the accidental noise we made in the attic. The biggest recurring noise problem was usually one of us waking with a scream on our lips. Whoever was on watch had to hush their friends' night terrors before it got too loud. Shalene volunteered most nights to let us rest. At least I think that's how her name is said. She was a dark-skinned foreigner traveling the realm with her merchant guild. She and her traveling companions hailed from far away in the land of Tlut. Her guild usually came through once a year selling their exotic spices, furs, and jewelry. We were left with the slim pickings of what product was left after selling out most of their goods at the capital and larger cities. Shalene must have been in training to take over the trade route eventually because she didn't know the common tongue, but she was made by her people to shadow the elder merchant and do everything he did. Jill and Shalene already had a report due to the elder merchant, forcing Shalene to interact with Jill in broken common tongue when Jill tried to buy a perfume. The crowd of villagers began to giggle at the cringe-inducing situation. Jill tried to use the little she knew of the Tlut language and made the merchants laugh. It was embarrassing for both women, but it bonded the two in its shared awkwardness. All of Shalene's people died in the initial attack on the village, and somehow Shalene had lost half of her left hand. It was probably bitten off by a ripper, but somehow she'd already stopped the bleeding and closed the wound. I think it had something to do with the dozen or so scrolls she kept on her person she guarded fervently. Now she mostly stayed in the attic and guarded the little ones. This was understandable because communication was already difficult enough with her not knowing the language. I'd gotten better at fighting my own screaming during my sleep. I almost never fell into a deep sleep anyways, and it just felt like I was skimming the borders of consciousness. My fitful slumber brought back the lowest time of my life, well, not counting this current situation. I remembered 5 years ago when I was 14 and my dad had just been killed in the riots in the capital. My father was a king's warden. His jurisdiction was in the cursed town we all hid in now. He also patrolled 3 more frontier settlements spread along the western border. 4 stone settlements, our town being the most northwestern. My father was tough and fair, slow to anger, quick to smile, quicker to help. He was loved by the townsfolk and was even given grudging respect by the few local criminals. All his years of steadfast loyalty to the throne got him called away from his home and thrust into a labor dispute at the capital. He came back in a pine box, bearing the official seal of the king. First I thought it must have been a mistake. They must have sent back the body of a child by accident. But it was him, all the parts they could recover of him. My dad's sword was also returned. It was polished, blessed with a holy parchment from the king's high priestess, and had been sealed upon the blade with a wax parchment. I was supposed to be left in his hands to help usher him to the goddess's side, but not enough of him remained to hold his weapon. So it went in the hole with him, longer than the entire coffin. He was buried on top of Mount Despair, beside the Academy's ancient watchtower and ceremonial grounds. The townsfolk showed as much turnout and respect as they could muster for their local lawman and his newly orphaned son as the Four Stones could. Most folks having to take the long way around the mountain to avoid the steep upwards climb. The headmaster offered me a free scholarship when I came of age and secured me permanent housing in the town. But all I wanted was space during my depths of grief, and the people gave me my space. Maybe too much for my own good. Oh, I remember even now, more vividly than ever, the day Jill saved my life. I decided shortly after my dad's death that I would follow after him into the afterlife. I would rejoin him and my mother, who'd passed away giving birth to me. We would reunite as a family at the side of the loving goddess. Finally, the constant struggle would be over. Struggle was a thing I'd known from childhood, like a spiritual heaviness upon me. I always felt a thick sadness dropped upon me. My father said my mother suffered from it too. He said she called it her constant struggle. Dark moods would take my mother like they would take me. I was chronically assaulted with thoughts of inner turmoil so hectic and awful that they threatened to physically pull me down into the grave dirt beyond my boots. But my father helped keep my head up. He kept the air in my lungs. He fought for me like he did his beloved wife when she was trapped in her dark moods. My father may have been a bit overbearing in his zeal to help me with an infliction he himself barely understood, but he stressed to me the bonds of family, community, hard work, and stopping to enjoy the little things to keep me motivated. He'd been my anchor, my light. Without him, I felt as lost in the dark as I did now, surrounded by the rippers. On the day Jill saved me, she must have seen the loss of hope in my eyes. She noticed something different, other than the normal grieving, as we passed each other in the town briefly. Later, I was atop Mount Despair, behind the watchtower, where my dad's grave was. Except I wasn't standing in front of my dad's grave. I stood past it, and past the lady willow tree that hung over it. I stood at the steepest and highest edge of the mountain. I looked over the beautiful mountains and the town beneath. I looked far towards the horizon where the capital lay. It was another beautiful day, but it was also another terrible day. And I knew in my deepest heart it was going to get worse. And I wasn't strong enough to survive. I didn't want to survive. I was so deep in my forlorn reverie that I never heard Jill approach. She'd been so quiet I wouldn't have heard her even if I'd been trying. For me, it was as if she just appeared beside me, taking in the panorama view of the mountains alongside me. "Jack," she whispered, "you aren't alone. You have the whole village beside you. I'm an orphan, Jack. I've never had family here." I said nothing and continued staring straight ahead as she continued her heartfelt whisper to me. I was convinced nothing she could tell me could keep me from doing what I had to do. "But if you need family now, then I'll be your family. I'll be your friend. I'll be your sister. I'll be whatever. Just don't do what you're thinking of doing." I heard her voice break. For the first time, I looked over to see her. She was staring at me, tears streaming down her face. She held me with a look of frustration and sadness. Well, Jill had always been a crybaby, so quick to show her temper and bust out the tears when we all played in school. But for the first time, I realized how beautiful it made her look, and this cut deep into my soul. "Leave me alone, Jill," I told her dismissively as I turned away from her passionate stare. I wasn't going to let this goofy girl get under my skin. How could she ever understand my grief? And she never knew her parents. She's used to being an orphan girl. I knew my dad for years. I loved him. "No, I will not, you stubborn boy," Jill sassed back. She leaned forward and grabbed my hand with both of her own. "I won't let go of you. You jump, I'll fall down with you. Do you really want to be a murderer, Jack, the warden's son?" "I wasn't going to jump, stupid girl," I yelled back with false indignation. "Can't you just leave me alone and stop crying all over me? A man needs to be alone with his thoughts at a time like this." "A man? More like an immature baby," Jill shot back, grabbing my hand tighter. "Sitting up here thinking about ending yourself while the whole village prays to the goddess every night for you? Oh, you're selfish and dumb." "Well, if I was suicidal, this little pep talk isn't helping me feel better," I told her dryly. "Then shut up," Jill retorted. We'll both shut up and just sit here until you change your mind and realize you aren't alone anymore. The ferocity in her teary eyes almost made me smile. And so, we did just as she commanded. Both of us sat in silence on the edge of the cliff, watching over the village. Jill never once let go of my hand. Hours passed and the sun dipped behind us, painting the clouds with the beautiful colors of dusk. Even though Jill was asleep, head resting on my shoulder, it still took an effort to pull my numb hand free of her own. But now that I was free of her feminine clutches, I didn't feel like going through with my steadfast convictions. I didn't feel like jumping. Scared as I was, I wanted to see the sunrise the next morning. Well, life didn't miraculously get better, but I seemed to pass through it with less pain as time went on. The unhealing wound in my heart never fully went away, but I learned to not let it dominate me. And Jill was there. She was always there when the burden got too heavy. But now I sat in the stuffy attic of the watermill. The world had gone dark again. Most of the townsfolk were dead, supplies dwindled, and all hope seemed lost. But I refused to believe it was over. I still had my sanity, I still had Jill. My life was mine to decide. It was just another day in an uncaring existence, but it was my existence. I'd broached the subject multiple times with my group of dwindling survivors. The idea of climbing Mount Despair had seemed like suicide to anyone that listened to me. People were skeptical of my story about how the blinding fog didn't cover the peak of the mountain. They doubted the supplies stashed in the watchtower would provide enough food for anyone that survived the climb. They doubted if we could avoid or outrun the Rippers enough to even make it to the top. But most of all, I suspected that the mad plan just seemed too hard to do. The survivors of the initial attack were already broken mentally. Why die tired and exhausted when you could just fold your hands and starve to death in the relative peaceful darkness? Well, we'd been a larger group of survivors then. My plan was either flat out ignored or outvoted. The adults thought age meant wisdom during this terrible time, and yet they all got what they wanted. They all died in the dark. This didn't mean I wanted to follow them so quickly into death. Taggart, Jill, Ma, and her 2 kids listened to my plan with grim determination this time. We all knew climbing the mountain was our last chance of survival. We were leaving after one last rest in the attic. "Jack," Ma whispered to me quietly. Startled, I turned to see her holding a dim candle between us. Her old face looked even more ancient now, with all the added layers of stress wearing away at her psyche. I could see the trail of fresh tears making lines down her dirty cheeks. "Ma, what is it?" I said as I began to sit up. She'd quickly become the group's den mother, and seeing her face so sad brought an instinctual reaction of protection from me. "Please settle, Jack." Ma shushed as she pushed lightly on my chest. "I have to tell you something." She strained to give me a reassuring smile. "Me and the girls aren't coming with you. I've decided we'll stay here in the attic." "No, just no, Ma. No, Mary. We're all leaving together. It's a death sentence if we stay here any longer," I began, already mentally prepared to have this long argument with her. "Oh, it's not your decision to make, sweet boy," she responded. "Casey and JC are too young to survive the climb. My old bones can't even climb down from the attic without help. I'd rather we all die in relative peace here. I won't let these demons rip apart my grandchildren." "We're a team, Ma," I said. "We'll take care of each other. Now go rest up while you still I gave them shade berries mixed with poppy seeds," Ma interrupted with finality. "Wait, what?" I gasped, my mouth dropping open in shock. The constant fog in my brain cleared enough for me to realize what Mary was telling me. "I already took my own shade berries before I came over here to speak with you. The deed's already done, child. I just wanted you to know how much I care for you, and how none of what I did is your fault. You're so brave, Jack. Your father would be proud of you." Anger began to heat up my face, and my fists clenched at the realization of what she'd done. Shadeberries were highly poisonous. 2 or 3 would be enough to kill her small granddaughters. Poppy seeds would keep them asleep through the terrible stomachaches that usually accompany the poisoner's death. "You had no right to make that decision for the girls. They could have made it," I gasped. It was all too much. The tears were flowing. I'd never been much of a crier, even when Dad died. But this continuous nightmare had broken me in ways I knew I would never fully recover from, and my emotions came fast and loose. "Don't upset them. Look, it's better this way. It's peaceful. Oh, I won't let them be torn apart in the streets, or slow you and the others down. Please, Jack, don't fight me on this. I'm happy. We're all together and happy." I went back to her corner to cuddle with her grandkids, and I could do nothing but respect her final wishes. I too retired to my dark corner of the attic. I was planning on sleeping until I woke up naturally. I need as much rest as possible, and I never got much sleep before the nightmare started anyways. As I closed my eyes and steadied my breathing, I knew 3 of my friends were taking their own last breaths while dying in the dark. "No more," I said to myself. "No one else. I draw the line here. Jill, Taggart, and Charlene will make it." I swore to any god that would listen to protect us. I swore an oath to my father. I knew the trek up Mount Despair was punishing regardless of the situation surrounding it, so maybe making this promise was the word of a young fool, but I didn't care. Once my resolve had strengthened, and I felt something other than fear in my heart. I felt a stubborn determination, a seething anger almost. It wasn't quite hope or courage, but anything would work to keep me going. The 4 of us were almost done packing our small packs for the journey. Each of us had gotten some sleep and food in our bellies. We huddled together and talked out the plan when we heard the worst or best sound we could ever hear at this time. "Graham, wake up," came the tiny, whispering voice of Ma's oldest granddaughter. My stomach sank with a horrid realization. I was facing Charlene and Jill, so I saw the reaction on both of their faces simultaneously. Shock, joy, sadness, anger, fear, panic, all in a flash. Incredible how the human face can display all these micro-expressions in 2 seconds. Charlene darted to the scared child first, followed closely by Jill. They were both light on their feet like dancers. They quickly stepped the short distance to little Jacy before she could realize her grandma was dead, and before the understandable sobbing began. So that's how our desperate climb was held up for 3 more hours. The 2 motherly, sisterly females huddled close over the young girl and whispered back and forth with her in common tongue and Charlene's language. Jacy went on to explain to the girls that she was just 2 years older than her little sister. She turned 10 during this whole living nightmare. Jacy didn't even complain about not getting presents on her birthday when it came and passed. She knew people needed help and she wasn't a baby anymore. The least she could do now was help Gram out by taking care of her little sister Casey when she could. So, Jacy inadvertently saved her own life when she let her younger sister drink her shadeberry drink too. She told Jill and Charlene only little kids like sweets anyways. She just snuggled up with Casey and pretended to be asleep when her grandma came back, so her elderly caretaker could get right to sleep without having to worry about the 2 of them. "She'll be okay," Jill informed me in Taggart, with clenched fists and a tear-stained face. "She'll be in me and Charlene's team. Charlene won't give you any say in the matter regardless." I looked over at Charlene. She'd placed Jacy on her back and covered them both with her cloak. Charlene knelt low and showed Jacy the satchel full of scrolls she carried around. They both conversed with each other in Charlene's strange language, and I was amazed at the resiliency and adaptability of children in such terrible situations. Jacy had been soaking up Charlene's language like a sponge during all the time Charlene was left behind to babysit. "What did she know about her ma and sister?" Taggart asked from the cramped corner beside me. Jill's face scrunched in thought. "She's been told they're under a deep spell. deep sleep. There's a potion to wake them at the top of the mountain." "You think that's right, Josephine?" Taggart quietly added. "I don't know, Taggart. When you're done with the instruction manual that only you have for this situation, I'd like to give it a look over and make sure my decisions are the ones you deem worthy next time," Jill snapped. She quickly realized her debut and put a hand up to her mouth as if to gag herself from any further outburst, and stepped towards the kneeling Taggart to place a caring arm on his shoulder. Petty fighting like this had become common due to fatigue, fear, and hunger. "We told her family was asleep. I think she knows we're lying," Jill told Taggart grimly. "She just wants it to be true." "Just like you think hope lies at the top of the mountain," said some dark, doubting voice from deep within me. "But just like with JC's family, hope is dead. There'll be nothing but darkness all the way up to the courts of the goddess. You'll damn them all, fool boy." "All right," I said, pushing the old enemy in my head back down into the depths. "Let's get out of this damn nightmare." Jill's initial scouting had been correct, it seemed, because there were barely any rippers roaming about. Hopefully they'd all moved on eastwards. We hoped it was because they were going to confront the king and his armies that were coming to save us. We all wanted this to be true, but none of us said it out loud, as if speaking it would curse it. There was so much evil around us that the Dark One could corrupt the words coming off our lips. So we walked in tense silence towards the foot of the mountain, me and Taggart moving up the front, a piece of rope tethered between us, Jill leading Charlene with her own rope as Charlene carried JC on her back. Both Jill and I had the magical monocles to see clearly in the dark. "Now, gather round. Usually, classes of fresh cadets are pushed to make this climb in an hour. That's well-fed, well-rested, in shape, aspiring wardens, being pushed by their instructors the whole time. Oh, and they can see what's in front of them," I told my people as we reached the starting point of the march upwards. I spoke at a normal volume with some humor, hoping my bravery was contagious. But our situation is quite different, so I'll give us 3 hours or more. "Jill, make sure Charlene understands. We can carry JC if she needs a break." Jill nodded to me in an acknowledgement, although I doubted Charlene would give up her young charge. So, our climb began, slow and steady. Still no rippers, thank the goddess, although almost immediately the hike started to live up to its name by already becoming a 35-degree incline. After 15 minutes of hiking upwards, we were all mostly crawling with our hands out in front of us. JC was down beside Charlene and crawled with her like a trooper. We finally reached a plateau area, meant for cadets to refill their canteens of muster for medical aid if it was needed. It was a well-kept space, meant to accommodate 30 cadets and instructors. 3 logs had been set down to serve as makeshift benches around a fireplace, and a small stream had been diverted to run along the outskirts of the mini-sanctuary. God, I'd always loved this place. "Okay, friends, we'll take a short rest here," I said as we all crested onto the plateau. I meant to tell them about the water stream further back before all the wind was squeezed out of me. Taggart had lunged forward and wrapped me up in a rib-crackling bear hug and flung me into the darkness towards the old fire pit. "Not yet. Not safe yet," were the panicked words Taggart was screaming as I tried to catch my breath and get up. My night vision monocle, through some magical boon of its own, never fell away from my eye even though I took a tumble. I saw the bright electric silhouette of a ripper gnashing its metallic fans at Taggart, but Taggart smacked it square where the nose should be, sending it reeling backwards. God, the sneaky monster had come up right behind me. Taggart must have seen it bare its unnaturally bright teeth before it tried to bite me. The rippers must have to solidify themselves in the physical plane before they can strike out, and that's how Taggart got that punch to connect with it. "To me," I yelled, furious at my own carelessness. I'd put Taggart in needless danger because I couldn't scout an area properly. "Jill, bring them over here," I yelled. I had a plan for when the rippers showed. I wasn't foolish enough to think prayers and luck would do all the heavy lifting to get us to the top of the mountain. I dropped my small pack and pulled out a piece of banged-up metal that used to be a bastard sword from another lifetime, Only now it was broken in two and barely the length of a short sword and about as dull as a butter knife. Oily damp clothes had been intentionally wrapped around the blade and held tight with metal wire. "Oh, this better work, Cavil," I prayed to the old swordmaster as I scraped a flint stone along the hilt to cause a spark. The spark ignited the cloth around the blade, transforming the useless broken weapon into what looked like a fiery weapon of destruction. I saw Jill as she led the girls to dive to safety beside me. They squinted and covered their eyes in surprise at the sudden appearance of the bright sword. I saw Taggart's larger frame sprinting towards me, his face pale white and coated with sweat as he tried to outrun the silver pair of fangs literally breathing down his neck. As much as I hate to admit it, the goddess blessed us when the Rippers bit Taggart, but only caught him non-lethally on his left shoulder. Taggart yelped in pain as the Ripper dug its fangs into his skin and began to force Taggart to the ground. He collapsed like a rag doll onto his hands and knees, giving me a clear line of sight at the Shadow's figurehead as silver teeth dug bloody holes into Taggart's skin. The late, great sword instructor Cavil told me the broken sword I now swung must have once belonged to a former warden or imperial infantry officer from around 80 years ago. Now Cavil fancied himself a history buff and snagged it off a passing merchant for dirt cheap because it was already broken in half when he came upon it. Cavil told me a few thousand of these swords were issued to officers or wardens, with blessed inscriptions etched into the hilt during the Second Necromancy War. Each had been personally blessed by the maidens of the church's highest echelons, the Jubilant Choir. Luckily, an 80-year-old blessing, burning rags, a dull blade, and, well, more luck, was enough to save everyone for the moment. The broken fireblade struck an inch above the silver fangs that were biting down into Taggart's flesh. I felt resistance as the flaming sword hit something, then cut through, extinguishing the flames on the blade. Through my monocle, I saw the Ripper's glowing head tumble off its body, and the rest of its body flopped over to the ground. "Did you get him?" Taggart yelled as he stumbled by me, flailing his arms in the dark. Taggart made it into Jill's arms while holding his wounded shoulder. "Oh yes, oh goddess. Oh, come to my voice, Taggart," Jill yelled to Taggart as she stood behind me. The body of the beheaded Ripper convulsed on the ground and let out a deafening hiss, causing all of us to back away instinctually. It smoked into a bright cloud of nothingness, only seen through my monocle. "Oh, goddess, it worked. Thank you, Cavil, it worked," I yelled. I didn't care if I was loud. That damned hissing was loud enough to alert everything on the mountain. We all gathered back together and tried to patch up Taggart's shoulder as best we could with our limited supplies. We filled our water bottles and got back into formation to begin climbing. "Okay, guys," I began. "That sword trick was a one-time thing. Let's hope that was the only Ripper left on the mountain. Just in case, we need to double time." "Jack!" I heard Jill call out. I turned to her and saw she was frozen in terror, pointing out over the mountainside towards the town. I turned to follow her finger and saw what had stricken her with fear. Floating 500 feet over the town below, but floating almost level with us on the mountainside, was a massive yellow eye the size of a large house. It had an eerie, sickly glow with large black pupae swimming around within it. The pupil twitched and rolled around in the yellow orb until fixing on me from over the long distance. "No escape," a dark voice in my head said. This was not the dark voice of depression, but something worse, something alien. It was a voice sent by the dark god. The eye was communicating with me. By dark powers, I felt the Rippers being spawned by the monstrous eye. The evil thing was using its powers to create more monsters to kill all of us. I could feel them stumbling over each other as they raced for the foot of the mountain with savage bloodlust, their silver fangs snapping in the air, wanting vengeance for the one Ripper I'd killed. "Right. We have to run," I said to the others, and grabbed Jill to shake her out of her stupor. "We have to run as fast as we can." Part 3. "I can feel them, Jack. I can feel them coming," Jill began to scream as I shook her and turned her to face me. I could feel them too, I just didn't want to tell her. Well, nothing changes. We climb, I said, getting in front of her and blocking her view of the floating eye. Dozens of the new rippers were being created by whatever that eyeball thing was. It had sent its message into my head. It hated that we'd dodged its wrath for so long, and now it was coming for us. I hoped the Dark One's monsters had bigger things to worry about, like maybe the King's army to the east. Even so, it seemed its hatred couldn't let the 5 of us survive. "Run, Kashinto," Jill said to Shaleen in her language. "I can feel them coming," she said as she took the lead by pulling the rope to usher the girls back up the cliff. Taggart and I hurried and caught up as we climbed with renewed vigor. We kept a good pace, a pace a group of cadets wouldn't be able to scoff at. We climbed on all fours, grabbing bushes and rocks for handholds to help propel ourselves higher up the endless ridge. Taggart and I caught our fair share of painful tumbling rocks and mouthfuls of dirt as we trailed behind the girls as they kicked up everything in their hurry. We couldn't complain and literally pushed them further if they slowed. At one point, a rock slide caused Jill to slip, causing a domino effect as we all tumbled into each other. We would have all been spiraling down into the darkness if it wasn't for Taggart catching us and yelling at me to pull my weight. We all tried to rearrange ourselves in the dark. I still knew the trail up the mountain the best and needed to be up in the front, but Taggart was a literal lifesaver by pulling up the rear of the party in case somebody fell. Me and Jill quickly agreed to switch places. I was leading with the rope connected to Shaleen and JC, while she followed with the rope in the rear end of the train with Taggart. "Or maybe I could wear a monocle and keep an eye on our 6, suggested Taggart through laboured breath as we leaned on each other for support in the dark. I considered what he said and realised it was a good plan if Jill was willing to. Piercing, high-pitched screams ripped apart the air and destroyed our conversation. The screeches sounded like the hideous mixture between a mountain cat and a tortured woman. There were dozens of them. They were close. Too close. Up we went as the screaming continued behind us. I pulled Shaleen and JC and Jill stayed almost right beside me, keeping pace as we scampered up the steep incline. We pushed through the aches in our bodies and ignored our lungs begging for more air. Lactic acid built in our limbs like a million fire ants. JC started crying and fell away from Shaleen's side. Jill and I turned to locate the child with our monocles, but Taggart had already found her in the dark by the sound of her cries. He picked her up and told her to ride on his back. Shaleen made physical contact with both of them and felt all over JC fervently, seeing with touch that JC was now safely atop Taggart's back. "We all move together," I said as I got to the right of Taggart and began pulling upwards. Jill got between Shaleen and Taggart and ushered them forward also. We would communicate by touch and noise and allow nobody to fall behind. We made progress slowly but steadily. The Ripper horde drew closer with their haunting screams. Finally, we hit the second plateau, and my body was in an ecstasy of relief for not having to be pushed up the steep incline. This momentary reprieve caused me to fall on my face, flat on the ground. Taggart took off JC politely and went to puke his guts out a few feet away. Shaleen, for once, was not obsessed with JC and was preoccupied with her scrolls, thumbing through them and speaking quickly with Jill. "Gather," I gasped. "We have to keep climbing." "Jack, wait," said Jill. I turned on shaky legs to see that she had given Shaleen the monocle, and now Shaleen was reading from one of her unfurled scrolls. "Shaleen has magic." "What?" Both me and Taggart asked with incredulousness. Taggart even stopped mid-vomit to voice his doubt. "She says it's taboo. Her clan called it blood magic, or bargain magic or something," Jill said as we all stumbled towards her voice like zombies. "We need to stay behind her when the Rippers come." I had heard this kind of thing before. My father told old stories about hunting down black market dealers of scrolls like Shaleen now had. They were Talut enchantments that were so devious they were declared prohibited and highly illegal in the lands. I supposed I would let this blatant mockery of the king's law pass, considering the circumstances. Shalene now had the scroll on the ground and never stopped reading aloud. She just let out a continuous trail of words in her language at a low whisper. She used her remaining 2 fingers on her left hand to keep track of the word she was on, causing her hand to zip back and forth melodically. "Shalene, goddess save, what's happening to you?" Taggart asked as Shalene's whole body now began to glow a dull orange. Tiny fiery red cracks and yellow embers began to form on her. Shalene wore a face of complete anguish as smoke began issuing out of her nose and mouth. "Get behind me," Shalene yelled to all of us for the first time in common language, her voice amplified and crackling by whatever strange power was racing through her body. She stood up from the scroll and turned to face the ledge of the plateau cliff we'd all just come up. The Ripper's triumphant screams were almost deafening now, and sounded like they were literally feet away from us, just barely over the lip of the cliff's edge. All at once, the Rippers quieted down. Their yipping and screeching tapered away like a group of rabid coyotes that had finally circled their prey. By this time, Shalene was glowing bright enough in the total dark that we could see each other as we huddled behind her. For a while, the only sounds to be heard was Shalene's labored breathing and JC's soft whimpering. We held each other for comfort in the low glow of orange. My senses searched for danger, but only found the smell of sweat, fear, and something burning. I watched the cliff's edge with my monocle's vision and knew at any moment the Rippers would attack. When they did, there'd be too many of them. There was no magic that could save us. But at least we tried, right? At least we died together, fighting together. Finally, the assault came. 6 of the Rippers crested the ledge, crawling low at first. They all grew in stature, in perfect unison with one another as they glided smoothly across the ground. This gave the monsters the appearance of standing tall as they stalked forward. Once they got a few meters from us, they let their metal teeth appear, causing a cry of fear from those in the group that weren't watching the horror through a magic monocle. Shalene spat out something in her language at them. Could have been a magic word, or it could have been the dirtiest insult. Either way, a blazing fire erupted from her left hand and she began screaming in pain. A bright hellfire bloomed out of her palm and engulfed 2 of the Rippers. I could see their solid black silhouettes still standing within the fire for a solid moment before disintegrating into nothing. Shalene continued to scream in agony as her left hand burned away into embers. But the other Rippers jumped at us and she aimed the stub of her left hand in an arch across her attackers. The magical fire only doubled in intensity as it sprung viciously from the missing end of her arm to devour the 4 remaining Rippers. They all burned and died along with the rest of Shalene's arm. Her left arm did the same thing as her hand and crumpled into embers all the way up to her shoulder. Magical fire burned whatever vegetation and dead bushes were on the plateau clearing, creating an unnatural wall of fire. Shalene went limp, and I caught her before she fell. Her body burned me for a second before shutting off like a switch. Maybe the magic was only active as long as she was conscious. I could hear more Rippers mustering on the other side of the fire, screeching in anger. Shalene's eyes fluttered open, and she began to fight me, pushing me away with her only remaining right hand. "No, Shalene, stop. You've done enough. We have to run. We're almost there," I said. Shalene's eyes focused on me. I could tell she understood the gist of what I said, and she looked down to where her left arm should have been in complete terror. Where a burnt or bloody wound should have been was only a nub at the shoulder. It was perfectly healed with skin over it. It seems the bargain magic played fair and only took what the user was willing to trade. I didn't decide to take her life also because Shalene should have bled out or suffered from shock. We pushed on even harder. Jill took the lead with 1 monocle, while I carried JC, and Taggart helped support Shalene by bringing up the rear with his own monocle. My body and lungs screamed, but I barely felt it. I knew how close we were to the peak. I wouldn't die here. The yapping and screeches of the Rippers drew closer. The fire must have gone out, or they took a steeper climb around to get to us. I began yelling out encouragement to my friends to push harder. I knew the peak was almost there. I knew it would be clear of the fog. I knew what I saw. Finally, like a nightmare lifting, the oppressive blackness faded. My lungs were filled with cool mountain air, and the starry sky seemed almost blinding. Relief quickly turned to horror as we all stumbled into the fresh night air. It was night. God, I'd never considered this problem. Could the Rippers still give chase? We climbed the remaining meters to the peak of the mountain, and we all collapsed in a pile together. I realized I was fine with death if it was unavoidable. At least we got to the top. At least we died together under the beautiful stars. Precious minutes went by as I laid on my back, facing up. I could hear that Jill and JC started to cry, and Shalene was maybe praying. Only Taggart was trying to stand and take a measure of the situation. I desperately tried to suck oxygen back into my system, and fought the waves of nausea and fatigue that threatened to make me pass out. All the while, the Ripper's screeches got louder and louder. Still, the new voice in my head stamped out the old voice of defeat. It told me to get up and fight, hold up in the watchtower. Just do something. I mean, we'd come so far. All at once, the screeching of the Ripper stopped, just like before. I imagined dozens of the shadow creatures mustering just on the opposite end of the cloud wall. They'd caught up, and an attack was imminent. Part 4. Jack, you better come take a look at this, Taggart said in a shaky voice. I peeled myself off the ground and took in the sights around me for the first time. The 3-story-high watchtower still stood strong as ever, dominating the top of the mountain. It was built against an incline. The stony structure appeared to be racing upwards parallel with the mountain's sharp peak. Actually, the mountain's peak went up a few meters higher than the tower to end in its jagged point, like it was trying to stab at the moon. The moon in the sky above was a half-moon, but the light it put out seemed blinding and brilliant compared to the constant gloom my eyes had adjusted to down in the fog. The moon and stars bathed the area with a silver caress as we were taking in the frigid night air. The peak had been flattened for the use of graduation ceremonies when the cadets finished the grueling climb to become wardens. It wasn't the large summit, but it was still big enough, being half the size of the town square below. It was perfect for 20 to 30 people to gather comfortably. Looking out across the world was surreal. It had given me the foreboding sense like I was on an island floating in an ocean of black tar. The black fog that surrounded us ran out endlessly in all directions, smothering everything in a blanket that stretched all the way over the horizons. This supernatural ink blotted the world away and erased everything all the way up to the diamond-like stars hanging in the night sky. A shiver crossed my spine as I looked out over the eerie stillness. The black flood didn't ripple or have waves like any regular ocean would. Instead, the faux ocean drowned everything it touched, and only showed a facade of a tranquil black pond above. But I also saw the quiet of a graveyard, the stillness of death. Jack, I said hurry, Taggart insisted. I got up and limped my way over to him, finally seeing what had him so alarmed. He was standing at the edge of the cliff and staring down at the black fog. He was almost jumping up and down with excitement. They can't leave the fog. They can't come out into the night sky, he said with barely contained excitement. We're safe. We're saved. Damn, you're right, I said as I looked down at the fog wall, now appearing as a fog floor. Through the monocle, I could see at least 20 of the Rippers lined up, just skirting back and forth impatiently like people waiting in line for a business to open. Every once in a while, one would push past the fog wall into the starlight and let out a demonic howl of pain before jumping back into the fog. They can't live outside of that stuff, Jill said as she appeared beside the two of us. I knew something had to give eventually. I knew the goddess had to help us. But we are safe, Jill. We made it, Taggart said, giving me and her a big hug. Jack was right. His stupid plan worked. Taggart's infectious laugh started, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. It was so infectious that JC and Charlene started to join in, even though Charlene didn't know what the hell he was saying. I began to smile, and it felt foreign and strange on my face as I shared the smile with each of my friends. They were all laughing now and hugging. Tears formed in my eyes, but I didn't care. It was good to cry and be seen. I began to speak, saying, "I'll check the tower for food and blankets. We still need to take turns doing security watch during sleep shifts until..." Another laughter cut through ours. It was a vile, corrupted sound. It sounded like cracking glass and a heavy exhale through mucus-filled lips. I stopped what I was saying and looked down at the fog wall. I didn't need the monocle to see the monster this time. A bloated white face looked up at me from the black. It seemed to float there and smile at me with disgusting curled lips. It was Dirge, the monster Kavil had pinned to the ground all the way back down in the town. Somehow it had unpinned itself, trekked up the mountain, and was enjoying itself just as much as we were. "Get the training swords," I said in fear as I turned to Jill and Taggart. "There should be a bunch of them stacked up against the watchtower. Hurry." Jill took off and grabbed JC to go help her. Taggart just squared his shoulders and gathered his courage beside me. Truthfully, I was glad he'd stayed, because I was terrified of the thing staring up at us. The stare down continued for what seemed like an eternity between us and the pale-faced monster. The corrupted thing never moved closer, only showing us its face above the black fog. Laughter came non-stop through its gritted yellow teeth, and intent was impossible to read in its white, pupilless eyes. Here, Jill said as she clambered up beside us with the dull swords. We all took one, and even Charlene grabbed one with her remaining hand and stood in line beside us. "He hasn't come up yet," Taggart whispered. "Maybe he can't, just like the Rippers can't." "He's a big faker," JC said with mock bravado, because I could hear the tremble in her voice. "I mean, he's doing something, though," Jill said. "He has to be planning something, or just trying to mess with our heads." I considered what my friends had said. The monster had to be up to something, but why hadn't it come up out of the fog? I suppose the moonlight did still harm the creature, just not as much as the Rippers. With my monocle, I saw the rest of its body. Dirge had grown to a hulking mass with what looked like arms and legs protruding outwards, with no rhyme or reason to it. I could only guess it was the bodies of the dead townsfolk somehow mashed together to form the abomination before me. So it just stared at the five of us and giggled maniacally as we stared back. If it came up, we'd all stand together and beat it down with the dull swords we had in our hands. It could kill us all, but we would make it bleed profusely before the end. This journey had made us warriors and no longer victims. An idea popped into my head, and a smile crossed my face. "Guys, I think I remember where the sharpening stones are kept, inside the watchtower." I turned my back on the looming face to point with my hand at the entrance to the watchtower. I intended to lead JC right to the stones, if I remembered correctly. We could have deadly weapons in no time. I was then met with a sharp stab of pain in my chest as something flew at me with great speed. I saw two red eyes glowing in a skeletal skull before the thing headbutted me right in the nose. I stumbled backwards, overwhelmed by the terrible stench of decay and the sudden sounds of my friends screaming in surprise. The thing wrapped its bony arms around me, and I pitched over backwards, sending us both tumbling down the hill together. I was confused and disoriented, as my dull sword slipped from my hand, and the world went around and round and round. I somehow caught myself on the incline, halting my desperate fall down before I went into the black nothing underneath. The skeletal ghoul still held me tight and tried to stab a broken arm bone into my chest, but only tore my skin and made me bleed. The ghoul was only a torso, 2 arms and a head. Its left hand was gone, and it was pushing its broken stub painfully into me. I tried to push the thing off me as its red eyes stared into mine. With a horrible realization, I saw that it was wearing a warden's dress uniform. This ghoul was of my father. Taggart had made it down the hill to help, but the laughing monster hidden in the fog finally made its move and rolled out of the blackness to swoop over me. As I laid on my back, I saw its nasty face look down at me and laugh with sadistic pleasure. Multiple hands seized me and the corpse of my dad and yanked both of us back into the darkness. Taggart's scream almost matched mine as I was carried back down the hill. I felt punches and kicks coming from all directions, causing stars to burst into the corners of my vision. I was thrown down on the ground with such force that all the air was evacuated out of my lungs. I tried to look up at my attacker, but a hand plucked the monocle from my left eye, leaving me in total darkness. Oh no, that wasn't entirely accurate, I realized. I felt warm liquid spreading all over my face. Dirge had ripped out my eyeball along with the monocle. By the mercy of the goddess, I passed out from shock. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but I woke up to pain all over my body in the pitch blackness. I was tied with a rope to a pole on level ground. I seemed to have some sort of rudimentary cloth patch over my eye socket. With only a few clues to go on, I tried to surmise my location. Awake, came a voice in my head. It was a crackling voice that split my brain like a migraine. Somehow, like dream logic, I knew it was coming from the bloated monster Dirge. Now, the fun begins, Dirge continued. I have sent away the shadows, the voice announced. It's only me and your friend. Here's where I am. Just like before, I knew the message was being sent to not just me, but to my friends on top of the mountain. When Dirge announced where he was, a mental picture of the third plateau, rest spot, appeared in my mind's eye. I will begin his torture. It will last days. His screams of pain will be your lullaby to sleep to for many nights as you cower away in your safe watchtower. I began to panic and pull against my ropes. He was taunting my friends to come rescue me. I didn't want to die, but I didn't want my friends to try and save me. I knew they would come, I knew it, and they would die with me. God, I had to get out. I could smell the acrid scent of decay and a bubbling, squishing noise that could only be Dirge moving towards me. A sharp stab went through my shoulder and I began to hear chanting in my head. Dirge was channeling dark magic into me. All at once, pain exploded in every nerve ending in my body and caused me to convulse and scream. Seconds felt like eternity, with the shooting pain worse than any physical wound could ever cause. Once again, I didn't know how much time had passed. Dirge kept channeling curses into me until my voice gave out. Then he would heal my throat with a spell and start the process all over again. I felt myself tittering on the brink of madness from the constant waves of excruciating sensations that he kept hitting me with. Finally, the monster stopped, and I felt one of his corpse hands put the magic monocle on my remaining right eye. I want you to see this, it messaged me mentally. The monocle revealed Dirge in all his rotten glory. He was about a 6 by 8 foot bloated mass of skin, legs, arms, and cadaver faces now. I could see the face of Cavill and my father displayed proudly on either side of his own grinning head. I looked up the mountain's path and immediately knew what Dirge was wanting me to witness. Taggart and Jill were making their way down with torches in hand. The idiots had swords, like that would do any good. Go back, Jill. Go back, Tag, I screamed. I can die in peace knowing you all made it to safety. Don't let my sacrifice be in vain. Please. Shut up, Jack, they both yelled back at me in unison. They made it down to the plateau and Dirge politely waited for them. Taggart had the extra monocle, and Jill could just barely see with the help of her torch. They began walking toward me, and Dirge slid over to block their path. One at a time, or two. It makes no difference to me, it messaged, and sprung at the two of them before they gave an answer. Taggart yelled for Jill to fall back and began battering away the monster's flailing limbs with his own sword. Every time Taggart cut off a limb, another one pushed its way out of the central mass of flesh. Dirge was clearly toying with Taggart by doing its maniacal laugh and catching him with a good punch or kick here and there. Jill just avoided the whole fight, which struck me as very odd. "Jack?" I heard a soft whisper beside me. Startled, I turned to see Jacy kneeling beside me, one of her eyes reflecting like that of a cat's during the night. She had a small dagger and was cutting through the ropes that held me. "How did you get out here?" I asked in absolute wonder. "Shalene's magic," she said with a giggle. "I told her I was going to come rescue you regardless of her help or not. I had to repeat her magic words and give up a pinky." She emphasized this with a sad face, held up her left hand to show a nub where her pinky used to be. "It's called Night Eye." Taggart finally had had enough and stumbled backwards to fall right at Jill's feet. Dirge cackled all the louder and moved in like a hideous slug. Jill stepped over Taggart and raised her torch in a defensive posture. "Stay back," she yelled, her voice trembling. "Just run, Jill," Taggart said, and I agreed with him. Jill was not herself right now. She was going to get killed. And Jill didn't run. She instead steadied herself, dropped the torch on the ground between herself and the monster, and gripped her sword with both hands. Dirge slowly moved towards her, giggling to himself at the sight of Jill shaking in terror. He got within 3 feet of her and stopped. The torchlight eerily danced off the two of them. "Hit me," Dirge taunted. He also sent the message with the mental picture of Jill being tortured in multiple disgusting ways. "Okay," Jill said, her scared expression changing to a mischievous grin. She lunged forward with a stab. The sword reflected brilliantly off the torchlight between them. It sank into Dirge's stomach like a hot knife into butter. Jill pushed it in, all the way to the hilt. That wasn't a training sword. Dirge let out a loud, almost burping vomit sound of complete surprise before a white light exploded from within its fetid mass, blowing bloody bits and limbs everywhere. The magical explosion blew Jill backwards and obliterated half of Dirge's body. He stumbled away, guts spilling out all over the ground. "What was that, Jacy?" I asked as she cut my last rope and freed me. "It's your dad's," she said. "It was in his grave after he came out of it. It was all wrapped up with fancy writing and a vial of water Jill poured on it." "Ah, yeah, a warden's funeral sword is blessed," I said with a sudden realization, "especially one that dies in battle for his king." I got up and began walking towards Jill. Jill and Taggart got to their feet with smiles as I came within the torchlight with Jacy. So it had been a con the whole time. Taggart hadn't been that hurt. They knew they could lure the monster into dropping his guard. Dirge convulsed on the ground now, trying to get up and crawl away to the edge of the mountain. Taggart laid out his pack and passed out an extra sword to Jacy and Jill. "I think this is yours," Jill said, presenting my father's sword to me. I took it without hesitation or argument. It felt like the rightest thing in the world to do. "Right, let's put this thing out of our misery," I told my friends with grim determination. We all marched towards the wheezing abomination. This time it was the monster that was too slow to outrun the Rippers. After we methodically tore Dirge apart, we made the last climb up the mountain for the final time. We got to the peak exhausted, but were greeted by the sun. Its warmth felt amazing on my skin, like a kiss from the goddess. We all huddled together on the outcrop where my dad had been buried, to rebury what little we found of him after we killed Dirge. Then we all just sat together in silence, looking out over the dark ocean of black fog as it contrasted with the morning sun. "Shalene said we saw purple explosions on the eastern horizon while we were gone," Jill said. "Could be the king's battle mages, an army moving towards us." No one replied. No one wanted false hope, but nobody wanted to cause any more negativity. We were just fine the way we were. We were together. and I was content with just wanting to see the next few sunrises and sunsets with my friends. So we just sat there in silence, the five of us, basking in the golden light of the orb in the sky. I had a new cloth eye patch and squinted with my remaining one. Shared a blanket with Jill. Jill had stripped down to her underwear since she'd been drenched in the rancid explosion of meat when she'd stabbed Dirge with the holy sword. Shalene leaned against Jill and hugged a sleeping JC in her remaining arm. Taggart sat with his legs spread out in front of him, bruises beginning to form all over him as he drank from a wine bottle he'd found stashed in the supplies in the tower. Only then did I realize I was wrong. I referred to these people as my friends, when they were clearly my family. So, my dear friends, I did ask you at the start of the video if you'd stick around for this. I know a lot of you do, and this is, for some of you, this is the favourite part of the video, which amazes me. It's just me rambling on about nonsense a lot of the time. Anyway, I do have a point to make today. Firstly, thanks again to the author of this one, Caleb Sleeger. This is a remastered version of a story I did about 3 years ago, which I was never quite happy with, even though I had the wonderful help of a collaborator, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Anyway, Caleb, we used to work a lot together, and entirely down to me, we haven't done for a while, and I miss you. Your stories are awesome. Really, really love your work, and I need to get back working with you. So if you're listening to this, then let's get in touch, okay? And on to the second point of tonight's story, Mr. Vedith, 22. He's gone through hell and back in the last few weeks because of a misunderstanding regarding the content that he creates. So please do me a favor, look in the video description. Go to his channel if you're not familiar with it already and subscribe. Go to some of his videos, leave comments and stuff, because he is he's brilliant. Really, really one of the good guys doing this fantastic content. And he's been misdiagnosed, let me say, as being not an authentic creator. So he's back amongst the living, I might say, and he would love your support. So drop by and say hi from me. That's enough for tonight. Anyway, I'll be back again very, very soon, maybe even tomorrow night. But until then, remember, just a sorry, and sleep well. Till the next time, my dear friends, I'll see you soon. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.